Okay, so my name's Todd Fraser. I'm an intensive care specialist and co-founder of Osler. I act as the Chief Medical Officer for Osler and its CPD Home. And this session is essentially designed for anyone who's in postgraduate year 2 who's going to become a postgraduate 3 doctor in 2025. For all of you who are in this category, next year will be the first time that you've needed to do organised CPD. Until now, it's all been part of the program that you're in at the hospital that you work in. But from next year, you'll need to switch over and join a CPD home. Just on the looking at the people who are attending, there's a lot of people who are older than PGY2 who are saying that they don't have a CPD home. So we just need to make sure that you're all aware that if you are a PGY3 and above, but you're not in a supervised training plan or in a college training program, you do need a CPD home in 2024, just to make sure that you are all aware of that. So the requirements now have changed. So previously, doctors who were in PGY2 or above were able to self-manage their own professional development until they got to the vocational training years when they joined a training program for one of the colleges. That's all changed. So now you have to join a CPD home, and that applies to every doctor with a few exceptions. If you're in PGY1, PGY2, you're an official training registrar, or if you're an overseas trained specialist who is seeking accreditation through the AMC and a college-approved pathway. Everybody else needs to join a CPD home. Now, for many people who are specialists, such as myself, we do CPD through our college program by and large. There's no requirement to do that anymore, however, as there are a number of independent CPD homes, such as Osler, starting to come out onto the market. Everyone who's in that pre-vocational group, such as many of yourselves, will now need to join a CPD home for 2024, if that's you, or 2025 if you're currently in PGY2 this year. So we're just going to go through what these changes to CPD are so that you've got a full set of information going ahead for next year. Now, you've probably heard a little bit about CPD homes, and not all of it is positive, to be fair. There's been a lot of criticism about the changes, saying that they're overly laborious, that it's unnecessary, that we all train ourselves anyway, we're all interested in education and so on. But the reality is that it's not going to change. It also, I think, is the reality that there is a bit more educational benefit to this approach than what a lot of people will tell you. And we'll come back to that in a little while. But I suspect you have heard that CPD homes are a struggle for many people. And I think it's really worthwhile understanding what the medical board is trying to achieve and what you need to do so that you can get yourself prepared early for next year. The reason that this has all changed is because of a report called the CAMERA report, which came out in 2016. And it was looking at how we as doctors continue to develop our skills and how we make sure that we are actually functioning at the level required of us to do our job properly. So this report reviewed what education strategies work and what don't work. And there were a few key messages, boiling it all down. The first is that instead of wandering aimlessly in the dark, we need to plan our CPD. And that plan needs to be based on what we think we're good at, what evidence we have for that, where we're trying to get to, and then what tools we have at our disposal to be able to achieve our goals. So trying to put some structure around your learning is really important. So that's issue number one. The next is that the medical board have indicated that there's a sufficient amount of evidence available which indicates that we're not great at understanding how well we do. And trying to build in a way of measuring our performance, either that be the process of giving care or the outcome of giving care, they feel that it's no longer appropriate just to learn stuff that we are interested in or learn things. We actually have to learn from the things that we do as well. So that's message number 2. And the third thing is that the types of learnings that we do needs to be more interactive. It needs to have reflection, it needs to have feedback, and it needs to be more dynamic. And that the types of learnings that are much more one-directional, like going to a lecture, for example, have far less impact on how we do in terms of our performance. So these are the new requirements. So for those of you in PGY2, this is for you in 2025. First thing, you must register with a CPD home, and that has to be a CPD home that's been approved by the Australian Medical Council. So at the moment, all the colleges, and some of those colleges do offer a CPD home to non-users, to non-fellows, but not all of them, but there are some. Osler, the AMA, and there's one other that's coming onto the market a bit later in the year are offering that. There is also a government-run CPD home, which is Hetty in New South Wales, but that's only available for New South Wales doctors, junior doctors, as far as I understand it. And then finally, there is a group that are offering CPD home to general practitioners who are interested in skin cancer. So for most people, it'll boil down to two options, maybe three: a college, the AMA, or Osler. The second thing you need to do, and the first thing you do once you've joined, is create a plan for your CPD. If you do happen to join Osler, there's a number of resources that will walk you through this process, will help you identify your goals, and then put your plan together in a format that gives you the best chance of success. If you are interested, there's a webinar on that on Osler that's freely available. You have to do 50 hours of educational activities, or of CPD development activities. You will notice I didn't use the word educational there. I'll come back to that in a moment. So 50 hours of professional development activities. And then you also need to complete any specific requirements associated with the program that you join. So each program can have their own requirements. And if you are trying to be registered as a specialist, then you also need to meet specific requirements, and that won't apply to too many people here tonight, I'm sure. With your plan, as I mentioned, this talk isn't about the plan specifically, but in broad brushstrokes, you want to identify where you are at the moment, where you want to go, and how you're going to get there. And it's important that you treat this as a living document, that you continually refer back to it, you assess where you're up to, what progress you've made, and continue to adjust it over time. And then finally, everyone is required to do a reflection on their CPD plan at the end of the year before they submit the portfolio for assessment. So the biggest change probably to CPD is that previously you were allowed to do any educational activities that were aligned with your scope of practice. That is not the case anymore. You need to do 12.5 hours and up to a maximum of 25 hours of educational activities. That's the most you can do of your 50 hours. The rest of that 25 needs to be an activity that looks at how you're doing, as I mentioned before. And these are broadly broken down into two groups: reviewing performance, which looks at the process of giving care, and measuring outcomes, which is what are the outcomes of that care on patients. You need to do a minimum of 5 hours in each of those and a combined total of 25 hours. So it will depend on what sort of practice you're in. You know, if you're a non-procedural doctor, you might look more at feedback or self-reflection. If you're a procedural doctor, you might find that you're doing a lot more measuring outcomes type activities like audits, for example. That leaves 12.5 hours unaccounted for. I suspect most people will do educational activities, but you can, in theory, do any of that remaining 12.5 hours in any of the three categories. It's up to you. So I suspect most people will do 25 hours of educational activities and then 5 of each, with a total of 25 combined of the other two. One of the biggest questions about this is, why have these changes been made? The Bloom report, which was the centerpiece of the medical board's review a couple of years ago, was saying that we need to have far more feedback in our learning. That is, some sort of information that we can use to reflect on our practice and turn that into learning opportunities. And so that's where the drive for this has all come from. In other words, we start with an action, we review that action, and we turn that into improvement. Now, the reason for this is largely because doctors aren't particularly good at self-evaluation. This is a guy called Marcus Watson, who's the director of the Skills Development Centre, and he didn't actually say that. I'm paraphrasing, of course. But what he did say is that when we're given credible evidence, we're good at self-reflecting. That's the type of people that we are. The challenge for us is understanding how well we're doing, because it's very difficult to measure how well you're doing in a complicated environment like healthcare. So that information needs to be or have certain characteristics. It needs to be very credible to you if you're going to buy into it. It needs to be specific. It needs to be relevant to your practice, and it needs to be accurate. Otherwise, we'll tend to dismiss it, particularly if that information is difficult for us to listen to, such as negative feedback, for example. So we need to buy into that information set if we're going to use that to change our practice. Looking at the learning activities, as I said, you need to do at least 12 and a half and up to 25 hours. And they can be any sort of activities that are of interest to you. They can be things that we traditionally think of CPD as, such as going to a lecture, listening to a podcast, going to a grand round session, a tutorial, going to a conference, reading journal articles, etc., etc. So all of these things can be used for the educational activities. Importantly, though, you need to document them. You need to produce evidence and upload evidence of these activities as part of that. And that might be, for example, a conference program, or it might be minutes, de-identified minutes of a meeting or a tutorial. So you need to be thinking about that while you're logging these activities. The other thing is that you must document what you learned from them, which is commonly referred to as a learning outcome statement. So writing an entry that you've read 3 articles and providing no further information won't be sufficient. You need to be thinking about documenting what you learned, providing enough detail that people can understand what it is that you've looked at, and then the sorts of lessons that you can apply to your practice with patients down the track. So there is a process that you need to go through when you're documenting all of this. The measuring outcomes and reviewing performances activities are where most people this year have struggled. And it's important to understand what you need to do, have a good think about what you're going to do to achieve these numbers, and start as early in the year as you possibly can. Otherwise, you'll run out of time and it'll be very difficult to catch up towards the end of the year. So this is the one that I would pay most attention to. 25 hours combined. You need to do 5 hours in each. The way when people are asking me what they should do for their practice, my advice is to always think, how do you know that you're doing a good job? What are the things that you want to be good at in your job, and how will you measure that? And those are the sorts of activities that you should focus on. And I'll give you an example. I'm an intensive care specialist. One of the things that I pride myself on as part of my work is being able to communicate effectively with the families of the patients that I'm treating. And so for me, a good metric of whether I'm doing a good job is a patient and family survey to get feedback on how I'm doing, whether I'm communicating effectively, whether I'm giving them the right information, and so on. So that's a great example of, for me, what I should be focusing on. Another example could be keeping tabs on all of the procedures that I do in the ICU and capturing complication rates for them, which will help me understand whether I'm performing at the level that I need to. So that's the sort of the way that you might think about it. Importantly, these activities don't necessarily need to be specific to you. They can be across a work group. So, for example, in the ICU, we could measure complications of intubation across everybody, not just me, but across the entire unit. You might want to audit something like that. So they don't have to be specific to you. They don't have to be hard statistical outcomes. You don't have to publish, your KPI on your knee joint infections or whatever it might be. You can use narrative data as well. So things like feedback are just as important as getting statistical or data, numerical data. And it doesn't need to be benchmarked. You don't need to compare yourself with the national standard or anything like that. The information is just something that you will find useful in calibrating your own performance. So I hope that makes sense. So that gives you a range of different activities that you might think about. So for reviewing performance, for example, you might seek to gather feedback about your performance. That can take a number of guises. It might be that you do a formal 360-degree feedback process, or it might be that you simply ask for feedback to be given to you about a procedure that you've done. But you can enter those episodes into your CPD portfolio, and that will be counted as reviewing performance. Self-reflections are another really good way of learning. Sitting down and systematically going through an event that's happened to you in the workplace can be very instructive. Any formal assessments that you have done. So a lot of people will have midterm and end of term assessments done. They'll have formal performance appraisals. They might have specific assessments done for being able to do a procedure or whatever it might be. So all of those things can be used as reviewing performance activities. And then some things like that are more practice orientated. You might do a practice improvement project or something like that. So that can be counted as well. The other thing is that you automatically you can get up to 3 hours of reviewing performance time just by doing your CPD plan for the year. So in some systems like Osler, that can be automatically done. As soon as you do your plan, you will automatically get your 3 hours added to your reviewing performance total. In measuring outcomes, we're looking more at the outcome of the care that's being given. So things like audits are useful there. That may be something like an audit of central line infections, which would be relevant to my practice. It might also be a logbook of the activities that you do. By recording that information into a logbook and reviewing the results periodically, you can get a lot of information about what you're doing and how well you're doing it. So those two things are very useful. The other thing that looks at outcomes is case discussions, which may be sometimes known as a morbidity or mortality meeting in the places that you work. It could also be a higher level investigation, something like a root cause analysis, a death audit. There's a number of different things that people refer to these things as. But if you're reviewing the outcome of a patient's care, then you can claim that as measuring outcomes. Now, during this year, we've discovered that a lot of people have had some challenges with getting these hours. For some people, say, working as a locum or working part-time, they might find that it's very difficult to accrue these hours. So one of the things that Osler has done this year is to put on a case review webinar series. The next one is on the 12th of November. And so we will present a case which is de-identified and sometimes partly fictionalized. We will then get you to break out into breakout rooms of small groups, facilitate some discussion and reflection on the case itself. And then we bring you all together and discuss the issues that were raised with a panel of experts. So this is a fantastic way of accruing hours online for those who are struggling to do so. The program level requirements are another area where people have occasionally struggled. Each of the CPD homes are responsible for including 4 elements of the Medical Board's Code of Conduct into their program. And those are culturally safe practice, ethical behaviour, professional behaviour, and addressing health inequities. Each of the CPD homes will address these in different ways. And it's up to you to make sure that you're compliant with your particular CPD home's requirements. In Osler, I can't comment on the others, but in Osler, for example, you have to do at least one activity for each of these 4 areas that are wholly or substantially associated with those categories. So an example might be if you're doing a course on the ethics of organ donation, then you would claim that one as ethical behaviour, and that would get you a tick in that box. It's recorded by you, but it will be assessed as part of the audit process at the end of the year. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. If people are struggling to do that, then there are collections of these sorts of activities that you can do to help tick off those boxes as well. The specialty high-level requirements are not really relevant unless you're registered as a specialist on the medical register. They are recommendations from the colleges that are made to the medical board. The medical board then reviews them and publishes them, and every CPD home needs to do those specialty requirements if you are seeking registration as that particular specialty. So an example is a general practice. If you register as a general practitioner on the medical registry, then you need to do a CPR course every 3 years. But as I said, that only applies if you're a specialist on the register. There's been a lot of confusion this year about timelines. So just to clarify, all CPD homes work on a calendar year basis. There's no rolling 3-year programs called trienniums anymore. They all work on a calendar year from the 1st of January to the 31st of December, and that's it. End of story. They are not related to your registration period. So there are some people who believe that the CPD year goes from September to September. That's not the case. They all run from the 1st to the January to the 31st of December. All CPD homes will allow a grace period for you to complete documentation, because you might get a CPD certificate from a course a bit later or something like that. But all activities need to be done in that CPD year. So for this year, they must be done in 2024. You can't include anything from 2023 or January 2025, as an example. Once you get to the end of that grace period, records are locked and an audit starts. So all CPD homes are required to audit 5% of their members at the end of the year. And this is a fairly laborious process that we go through, checking documentation, ensuring that everything has been properly documented, that it aligns with your scope of practice, that it's a reasonable thing to be doing, et cetera, et cetera. So we will be doing that process through February through to April. There's a process for review and appeal that each CPD home needs to have. And once that process is completed, those who have completed the program, as I've just outlined, they'll be notified to the medical board that they have completed Osler's program or the CPD Homes program. And those that are registered with them who have not completed it have not completed it. So that information is sent to the medical board. The other thing is that anyone who has been granted an exemption, that information is also passed on to the medical board. All of that will happen around the middle of the following year. So for the 2025 year, the medical board will be notified mid-2026. At that point, the medical board will follow up with the individual doctors themselves. So what does Osler do in this? And you can apply this to all CPD homes, but Osler's focus is on making this process as valuable educationally as possible. So we all know that we need to do this, and many of you will probably be thinking, well, this is just another thing that I need to do. In many cases, it's not that. That's not the case. We're already doing a lot of these activities anyway. You might learn things on a ward round. That's just a matter of tracking that now, adding it to your CPD. You might go to a tutorial, you might listen to a grand round, you might read a journal article or some other, go to UpToDate and read something about a patient that you've just seen. All of that counts. You might be going to a morbidity mortality meeting as part of your rotation. That will count. It's just a matter of documenting it. So while it looks like you've got to do an extra 50 hours of activities, often that's not the case. And we're building in features that make this as easy as it possibly can be to record that sort of time. But our focus is on making this as easy as possible, but also making it as educationally valid for you as it can be. We also believe that there is nobody wants to be paying a significant amount of money for this, and we certainly understand that. And some of the charges that are being charged by some of the other CPD homes are quite large. So we are doing everything we can to keep our costs as low as possible. We also believe very firmly that you need to protect the information set. We're not associated with an employer, for example, like some other CPD homes are. The data that you have stored in your portfolio is yours, and we protect that as best we possibly can. We also think that it's a very difficult process, particularly right now when we're only just starting this. This is a new process, and for many of you, it will be the first time you've done organised CPD. And so we've built in a number of ways that we can assist you, including the people who are on this call who are always available to provide assistance. There's also a number of help articles and videos, webinars, etc., that can help you to get through this process, as well as an AI coach that we've been training for the last 18 months to provide you with information that will help you. So there's a lot of support to get you through. And then finally, of course, we're responsible for auditing and reporting. Our aim is not to fail people. We want to help you get to a point where you can get through the process and be reported as compliant to the medical board. So we have no interest in making this hard for you. We want to try and make it as easy as we can. So we've automated a number of different processes within the system to take some of the time and the pain out of this. So for example, you can record patients and procedures in your logbook. That counts as self-audit time. So you don't have to add that. We automatically add time for each person that you add into your logbook. If you perform a self-reflection, same thing happens. Another half an hour gets added under reviewing performance. If you get some feedback on a procedure that you do, then you'll get more time. And of course, if you do your performance development plan, you will as well. So there's a number of ways that this can be made simpler and easier for you. And the other thing is our CPD coach, as I mentioned. So you can ask the coach anything. You can ask it for ideas for an audit. You can ask it what activities on Osler might suit you. It knows a little bit about you, so what your role and your specialty interest is, and it can tailor its responses to your needs. So you can use that extensively to help you. Here's an example of a career development plan. So essentially, it's just looking to develop your objectives, do a self-evaluation of where you currently sit, and then allows you to add as many different tasks as you want to, so that you can follow along during the year. In terms of automating CPD, here's an example of a module that we've got on Osler. You can simply click that button when you've finished the module. It opens up a dialog box telling you what you or asking you to put in what you learned, and then it's automatically stored for you in your CPD portfolio. All of it's displayed, so you always know when you're up to date. You can see just here, if I click on this bar here, the reviewing performance bar, it drops down a list of activities that are contributing to that category. And some of these are what I was talking about before. So all of the self-reflections are included in this summary. If I want to see what they are, I can click on them and that will take me to the individual records. And if I'm still not sure about activities that I might want to do, I can click on the show button here and there's a list of all the activities that can be included under reviewing performance. So as I said, we're trying very hard to make this as easy as we can. So while that all might seem very overwhelming, let me just put it into real terms for a moment. This is what your CPD might look like. Now, I know you're all different and I'm not sure where you're all going, but so most people going into a third-year job, this might be achievable. So let's say you're going to do 25 hours of learning. I think that's pretty much a given that most people will. You do your plan, there's 3 hours of reviewing performance hours. If you document 50 cases and you get 0.1 of an hour for each of them, there's 5 hours. If you do another 50 procedures during the year, an IV, you assist in theatre, you do an intubation, you do a plaster of Paris, whatever it might be, there's another 5 hours. So we're now up to 13 already. If you seek feedback on 24 of those cases, there's another 6 hours. And then if you do one self-reflection a month, there's another 6 hours. And we've now got 25. So we're done. So there are some fairly simple ways that you can tick off the time. And not only that, use it as an effective way of learning along the way. So that's it from me. But if anyone has got any questions, please send them through. I see there's been a bit of activity on the webinar chat. And I might ask Nicola.
Oh, hi. There's just a few little questions about exemptions, and I've just explained very briefly what they mean. But if anybody wants to know a bit more about those leading into the new year, just let us know and I can provide you with more information on those. And
do you want to just summarise what they are for the overall group, Nick?
Yeah, sure. So to be considered for an exemption, you need to have more than 6 months off practice at all. You cannot work even one shift during that 6 months, or the medical board considers that you're not eligible for an exemption. You can apply for an exemption on medical grounds or personal leave grounds, maternity or paternity leave, or ceremonial leave. And the process for applying is that you contact your CPD home and they will assess your application. You need to supply some sort of documentation to prove that you're having that much time off work. And then that, as well as your exemption paperwork, is submitted to the medical board on your behalf the year after to meet your compliance with CPD requirements.
Thanks, Nick. There's been a few questions about the sort of evidence that you need, and this is challenging in some cases. There is a document on our website which tells you what the evidence is that you can use for various activities. We also are aware that it's not always possible, that you might go to a tutorial and there's just nothing physical that you can use to upload, for example. You can get creative with it. You might take a screenshot of or a photo of the first slide of a presentation, something like that. That could serve as evidence. But when there isn't any good evidence, try to put yourself in the position of the auditors. How do they believe that you, or what can you do to convince them that they have, that you've done that activity? And what it really comes down to is a detailed description of the activity and a detailed learning outcome statement. As I mentioned during the discussion a little earlier, if you put down, I read 3 articles, that's highly unlikely to get through the audit. If you write what the articles were and the types of things that you would taken from it to relate to your practice, they're the sorts of things that will get you through. And sometimes that learning outcome statement on its own can serve as evidence of the activity. So I hope that makes sense. The other thing is can things be claimed as measuring outcomes and reviewing performance? One early screen is to put that through our coach and ask them what they think. And often that will answer for you. We keep an eye on the coach at all times. So if it does give any information that's not correct, we'll contact you and follow you up. But if you are in any doubt, you're always welcome to email us, and we will provide you with some support in determining which category these things can go into, because there is a lot of grey. It's often not clear. The differences between these categories aren't clearly defined by the medical board. And so there is some interpretation involved, and we're here to help you get through that process. Another question that's been coming up, I'm not sure whether Nicola touched on this, is people who have been out of practice or are coming to Australia to start working. Again, the situation is a bit fluid and unclear because this is the first year. So there's a lot of edge cases that are a bit messy. In general terms, if you are practicing in Australia and you don't have an exemption and you're not in one of the exempt groups that we mentioned before, you need to have a CPD home. And all Osler can do, or any CPD home, is report what you enter into the system. So if you're joining, like one person is, if you're coming to Australia in October, you can backdate all your activities through the year, but we will report what you put in. And so if you don't comply for whatever reason, it might not be possible for you to, we will report that to the medical board as you're not compliant. But that doesn't necessarily mean that something bad will happen to you. Once the medical board is notified of that situation, they will be in contact with you. And for those people who have got legitimate reasons for not completing their CPD, then they'll be, the medical board has the discretion to deal with that. But Osler itself, or the CPD home itself, can't actually do those things on the behalf of the medical board. But we will be available to support you and help you regardless of what the outcome of the medical board's review is. If you've been out of practice for a prolonged period of time, I think it's greater than 6 months, Nick, if I remember correct, sorry, 12 months, then you need to go through a return to practice assessment by the medical board. And the medical board will advise you of what CPD you need to do in order to be eligible to get re-registered. Once you've got that determination from the medical board, Osler can then assist you with that, but it's up to the medical board to determine what you need to do to be able to practice again, not a CPD home. So hopefully that clarifies. So yes, you do have to do 50 hours by the end of the year. That is a requirement, and not knowing about the CPD home concept until late in the year is not seen as an excuse by the medical board. You will have to backdate all of that information if necessary. Question about the PGY2s rolling over into PGY3s. Another great example of where everything doesn't line up effectively. But from the CPD Homes perspective, all of those activities need to be done in the calendar year, not the 12 months from the end of your PGY2 to the end of your PGY3. It's all based on a calendar year. And that said, you can still backdate activities that you did in that 1 month that was at the start of your of the year before you became a PGY3. Lots of other edge cases. What happens if you become an official college trainee halfway through the year? Again, that's not something that your CPD home can help you with. Ultimately, if you did, let's say you went through 6 months and then got onto a training program, you can stop doing activities with your CPD home. Your CPD home will ultimately report you to the medical board as not complete. The medical board would contact you and say, what happened? And you'll say, I'm now on a training program. And they will almost certainly say, That's okay. No problems. We understand. So that's a good example of where the fact that you get reported as not complete does not necessarily mean something bad is going to happen to you. Wherever possible, stay in touch with your CPD home. Keep up to date with your CPD activities. If you happen to do no activities in that 6 months, it's going to look a lot worse than if you were halfway through your program when you got onto the training program, as an example. Rachel asked, is it a good idea to complete more than is necessary? Absolutely 100% yes. There's no doubt that it makes it a lot easier for the CPD homes to support you if you've got more activities in your portfolio, because once you've hit the thresholds, when they're auditing you, they'll go through the list of all your activities and they'll be counting up. And once you've hit the 50 hours or the 25 hours of MO and RP, they'll stop auditing. And so if they've found some that they have question marks about, but keep going and find more and you hit the targets, then that'll be the end of it. So it's always a good idea to continue to add activities in beyond hitting your targets. And there are people who have logged hundreds of hours this year for their education, which is fantastic. So rather than talking about specific activities, as I mentioned, there is documentation in each of the CPD homes that will walk you through what counts and what doesn't count. Each of the CPD homes will have a support service that you can contact as well. So there will never be a case where you can't ask questions about whether the activities that you're considering will fit into a particular category or not. So I think we've got to the end of the questions there. Look, I'm sorry if I haven't answered your question and I missed one along the way, but as I said, we'll review this at the end of the session and we will send around a quick fact sheet for you so that you we can answer those questions for you. So thank you very much for your attendance tonight. By all means, please get in contact if you have further questions. We're more than happy to answer them. We'd love to see you join Osler in the near future, and please recommend us to your friends if they're looking for a CPD home for next year. Yes, thank you very much and good luck in the future.